To keep or not to keep? That is the question. Welcome everyone, StealthyShiroean here, and today I'm bringing you an episode of Wishlist Reviews. I'm someone who has a ridiculous wishlist, which as of this writing is just shy of 350 games. Every now and again, I like to go through the games on my wishlist and reassess if I'm still interested in them. It's crazy, and my wife says I have a problem, but here we are. Maybe you're like me, or maybe you aren't. If anything, this video might be able to help you make decisions about things on your wishlist, or maybe add some more to the pile. Here, I take a look at 3 different management games that have caught my eye, and decide whether or not I'm keeping them on my wishlist. Without further ado, let's get to it. First up is Animal Shelter 2, and yes, it's a simulator game, but I also figured it doubled as a management game since you are, in fact, managing an animal shelter. You start off as seems to be typical, with a cluttered dump that needs to be transformed into something respectable. Luckily, the game knows that you don't want to spend the first several hours just setting up your shelter, and the cleanup is rather quick. Almost immediately after, it tasks you with rescuing your first animal. This involves sending a van out to various locations to animals that are in need of a temporary home. Once the animal arrives, then you need to get to work making sure their needs are met. Obviously, this means giving them food and water, but you also need to make sure they're clean, and of course, getting lots of love. Who's a good boy? There are other items you can purchase to play with the animals and take care of them. Admittedly, the demo is a bit limited, but a look at the Steam page suggests there's a slew of items to use in your shelter. On top of that, there's quite a bit of customization from your avatar to the different rooms in the shelter and the workers' uniforms. I'm sure it will be great for many who love to interact with these sort of systems. Normally I don't, but I think had it not been a demo, I would have spent a lot more time customizing. My main focus was the animals though. I know, big surprise. Right now, they're focusing on dogs and cats, but it would be cool to see other kinds of pets in the future. There are only 2 breeds of dogs and cats to see in the demo, but they were cute. I liked what I played, but worried that maybe some of the gameplay would start feeling too repetitive over time. However, I figured it might seem that way because all the animals seem to have easygoing temperaments. Perhaps animals with other dispositions might pose different challenges. Furthermore, things like any sort of vet checkups weren't in the demo, so that would add some more variety to the game. That said, I did think by the end of the demo, I was just starting to see how everything could start stacking up. I felt like I needed to start building a routine to check in on the animals, top off their needs, and work with the next one. You could hire help, but I wasn't quite sure how great it was, but that may be because I only had 3 animals by the end. To answer the question of to keep or not to keep, it's a resounding to keep. All in all, I think this game offers something for fans of simulators, management, and definitely animal lovers. Oh, and I didn't get a chance to play it in co-op, but yes, this game has multiplayer that you could play with a few friends. If interested, you won't have to wait long because it comes out on July 24th. To do a complete 180 in tone and setting, I also checked out Cthulhu Keeper, which has you take on the role of a cultist leader who is tasked with expanding their cult's power and serving their dark cosmic masters. Obviously, as the name implies, the game takes inspiration from things like Dungeon Keeper and the Dungeons franchise. I can't tell you how faithful they stayed to their inspiration since I've never played those games before. However, what I'm pretty sure those games didn't have is stealth action missions similar to that of a Me game like Shadow Tactics Blades of the Shogun or Desperados 3. However, let's discuss the management side of things first in the form of the dungeon or layer builder. With your loyal cultists, you manage the construction of various facilities and research. Things like a temple to recruit new cultists, or an archive to learn how to summon Lovecraftian monstrosities to your cause. Each of these monsters, like the Deep One or Migo, need to have habitats built for them that match a certain aspect, such as jungle for the Deep One. And in order to build all these rooms, you need to excavate further into a mountain, I'm guessing. Anyway, all these things raise your threat level, which really just acts more like a suspicion level. If it gets too high, then intruders can show up. You could have your cultists and monsters help fight them off, but there are also defenses you could build as well. However, most of the time, I just found myself dealing with people who were too curious for their own good, rather than facing police authorities or even angry citizens with pitchforks. To which I just sick my deep one on them.
To get out of here.
One thing I did think was weird was that the threat level would then get reduced after the so-called intruders would be taken care of. However, you'd think that if people mysteriously vanished by this clinic, then it would raise some more suspicion. I guess people are just too scared to investigate. Like I mentioned, the other half of the game, actually I felt like a bit more than that, is the stealth action missions. It didn't feel quite as polished as something Me games put together, but to be fair, that dev studio had years to perfect their craft. That said, what's here is competent and fun. At the start, you select your cult leader, although for the demo there was only one, the Crazy Doctor. Presumably, each choice will have their own abilities and perhaps narrative backstory since it provided background for Lilith's character. Anyway, you could also take monsters with you on a run that you've summoned. Between the abilities of your cult leader and the monsters, you have a wide array of tools to move past enemies and catch them when they're unaware. Each mission has their own set of objectives and felt varied enough to offer different challenges. The one thing I did think wasn't quite so varied were the different enemy types, but hopefully that's just because it was a demo. And to answer my question of to keep or not to keep, the answer is to keep. For now, anyway. I like what I played, but I also want to see more of what they might do with their story. I'd also like to see how the cult layer building aspects develop further in the game. It seemed a bit light to me, and if I was playing this for just the stealth action, then I'd probably play the aforementioned Me games that I still have yet to complete. Still, this is something I want to keep on my radar. Before I get into the final game, if you're enjoying the video or found it helpful, then please consider giving this video a like and subscribing for more video game coverage in the future. Finally, I took a look at Let's Build a Dungeon, which some of you may know from their previous game, Let's Build a Zoo. Let's Build a Dungeon has a unique concept of essentially building a game within a game. Game.
Huh? I'm impressed.
For somewhat long-time viewers of the channel, you may remember my first impressions of Questmaster last year around this time. That game had a robust dungeon maker that allowed players to build Zelda-like dungeons and play them as well. There were plans to eventually make an overworld generator, but that won't happen until after its 1.0 release. And all that is to say that Let's Build a Dungeon actually offers more than just building a dungeon. Although there are some caveats to that, but more on that in a bit. What Let's Build a Dungeon does is have you taking the reins of a game developer managing a team to build an MMORPG. A lot of the game's appeal does come from building the game and its associated world, but I have to say that the appeal of managing these different meta aspects sounded neat, especially with how it might coincide with the actual development of the game. The player-made game within the game, I mean. Unfortunately, that aspect of the game was hands-off for the most part. There was the necessity to assign artists to making certain assets through the use of spending points. However, the rest of it was usually just seeing people leaving playtest reviews, or I'm assuming they were playtest reviews since the game wasn't supposed to have been published. And there were also interactions outside the game's development program with your investor, who may or may not have been based off of a famous and influential individual in the MMORPG genre. And that was really it though. I'd like to see how these aspects are fleshed out in possible updated demo releases, or in the full game once it comes out. Obviously, the lion's share of the time with the demo, and probably the full game itself, was with the creator's tools. In the beginning, you select an island layout to make your first town. I was a bit confused because there was really no direction. Just a few decorative objects like signs and fence, along with some trees and paths to place down. It wasn't until I started placing things down that the town's borders grew, and I got access to new assets to place in the world. It's at this point that the game asks you what the player's starting class should be, and at the moment you have a choice between a mage, explorer, and a forager. The choice has some bearing on what you build because the quests you design will favor certain class types. Although, I'd be remiss to say that you're designing these quests. The quests are kind of preset with certain NPCs, buildings, and other items that need to be placed down in order for it to be a completed quest design. It started simple with me just needing to place an NPC in some tall grass. Apparently he lost something in the tall grass and needed players to help him find his MacGuffin. Eventually, you need to be placing down buildings with various items inside, along with dungeons. And that's where I felt like I had the most creative freedom, as you can design the layouts however you please, with a few considerations that you need to meet, such as how many floor tiles you use, spawners, and other required objects. As you progress as the designer, you need to be paying attention to how your players react to these quests, as to their difficulty, and whether players are able to finish them. It was really neat, and I imagine creative players will find themselves sinking tons of hours designing their own virtual worlds. However, Let's Build a Dungeon also lets you play these dungeons, and the game as a whole. This was really cool, but I can't say I cared for it that much. The controls felt off to me. I can't really place why they didn't feel right, but the combat and movement felt stiff. If you're expecting something like a 2D Legend of Zelda that you create yourself, well, it's not quite that. But hopefully this aspect will improve, and it's a really great addition nonetheless. And to answer the question of whether to keep or not to keep, my answer is not to keep. That may come as a surprise because after all, I was pretty much praising the game. And yeah, it's definitely something I'm interested in. However, after playing it, I know that I just don't have that kind of time to dedicate to making anything interesting with this pseudo game creator. I felt the same about Questmaster, but at least I enjoyed the gameplay outside of the dungeon designing, so playing other people's creations is something that still appealed to me. In Let's Build a Dungeon, I don't know if that aspect would hold up. However, I still think it's a solid game, but probably not one for me in the long run. If you played any of these demos, then let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you haven't, then let me know if these sound like something you'd be interested in, or if you have any other questions. I hope this video helped you in some small way, and if it did, then please consider leaving a like, comment, subscribe, or whatever it is you feel like doing. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.